My dad tore down the blanket while I slept so he could protect my daughter at 2 a.m., pressing it to his chest when I screamed. When I demanded he stay away, he smiled and said, "Family shouldn't hide from family." I just walked away. That was 3 years ago. Yesterday, he was being led away in handcuffs, still muttering about doors. Ever since I was born, our house had an open door policy, if that open door policy took steroids. My dad specifically loved enforcing it and always told us that if a door was left closed, I could say goodbye to it. I always thought he was joking until I turned 5 and experienced it myself. I was in the room with my dolls with a closed door when suddenly it slammed open. Next thing I knew, Dad had his tools out and was taking the door clean off its hinges. He then went out into the back and burned it. It still had my bunny stickers on it, but he didn't care how hard I cried. On top of that, by dinner, not only the door, but the dolls I'd bought with my own money were burned too. I cried to my mom, but all she could say was that Dad had anxiety about hidden dangers, so it was best to just let him feel safe. Thing is, this only got worse as I got older. When I got my first period, I desperately wanted some privacy, but the curtain my dad installed wouldn't fully close. Naturally, I shut the door. That's when he barged in claiming, "Nothing natural needs hiding." He stood there while I changed my tampon in the shower, telling me not to be shy. I thought it couldn't get much worse, but I was wrong. After weeks of begging my mom for a sleepover, she finally agreed for my 14th birthday. My friends arrived excited, having never visited, until they saw our doorless house. There were a few strange glances thrown my way, but we moved on, running straight to my room giggling with excitement. But the happiness did not last long. My dad started hourly safety patrols with his flashlight peering into my room. He came in and examined every one of my friends, telling them to twirl to make sure they didn't have anything on him. And since I was the only one with the skirt, I had to twirl the longest. My friends were too creeped out and got their parents to pick them up. The next day in school, everyone was whispering about my doorless house and creepy dad. Their parents banned them from talking to me. I lost all my friends and became completely isolated. I remember at this time I began truly hating my dad, and that only intensified at 16. I woke up to him pulling off my blanket. I screamed at him, and he went red before claiming he was searching under my mattress for contraband. My mom actually tried to intervene, but she was dragged out of my room. All I heard was the slap before the house went silent. The next morning, my mom had a bruise, and my door frame had a camera set up in it. I left at 17 with just a backpack to go to college. I didn't speak to either of them for a full 20 years, and I should have left it like that. But one day, I decided to bring my 12-year-old daughter to visit. I didn't want to see dad, only mom. So I had her promise me that she'd keep my dad away from my daughter. She said yes. Well, at around 2 a.m., I woke to the feeling of my daughter pressing into my chest. She was sobbing that grandpa had been touching her hair. I looked up, and that's when I saw the blanket we had put up for some privacy had been torn down. Dad had been touching my daughter the whole time we slept. I rushed out and saw him in his room sleeping, pressing the blanket against his chest. I wanted to call him on the spot, but before I had the chance to confront him, my mom appeared out of the bathroom. I could see visible signs of what must have been her attempting to stop him. She broke down and started apologizing profusely. It broke my heart as she explained how she hasn't slept properly in decades because of his nightly patrols. If she even covered her face with the blanket, she'd gain a new bruise. She even admitted to using buckets outside because he watched the bathroom constantly. When I asked her why she won't divorce him, she said it's because she still loves him. That's when I knew she'd never save herself. I began studying conservatorship law for months. I also started documenting everything with hidden cameras. I'd return to the house to stay the night, just to record him removing hinges at 3 a.m. and explaining to me why doors were dangerous. I returned to family gatherings just to mention people in the back garden, then record him freaking out and getting violent with the nearest person. Once I had all my evidence gathered, I called Adult Protective Services. They saw the doorless house and mom's condition. I was there when it happened, and once my dad realized what was happening, he attacked the social worker. While attacking, he started ranting about doors being deceptive and demanded they let him protect his family how he sees fit. The police had to get involved. They evaluated and released him, but the report was filed. A few months later, at the conservatorship hearing, Dad still insisted doors hid dangers. Unfortunately for him, the judge watched footage of him in my old room. She heard my mom testify about the buckets and bruises through tears. This was more than enough in itself, but my dad nailed the hammer in the coffin himself when he screamed that we were conspiring against him. The court granted conservatorship immediately. They placed him in a secure memory facility. I watched security restrain him as the heavy door swung shut. The electronic lock clicked. It was the first door he couldn't remove. He pounded against it, begging. But those doors only opened from the outside. 3 years passed by. I visited him every so often, and it was always the same, until last week. I asked the nurse to take me to him, and that's when she dropped it. "Your dad was released last week." My heart stopped. Released? The word echoed in my mind as I stood frozen in the facility's sterile hallway. The nurse must have seen my expression because she quickly pulled up something on her tablet. According to our records, his conservatorship was terminated by court order. A family member petitioned for his release. She scrolled through the information. "It says here that your mother filed the paperwork." I grabbed the wall to steady myself. Mom. Of course it was Mom. 3 years of freedom, 3 years of her finally sleeping through the night without fear, and she'd thrown it all away. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. My daughter was at school, safe for now, but panic clawed at my chest as I ran to my car. The 20-minute drive to my childhood home felt like hours. The house looked different. Wrong. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed it immediately. The front door was gone. Not just open, but completely removed from its hinges. The empty frame gaped like a wound. I approached slowly, my body tense. Through the doorway, I could see straight into the living room. Mom sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. When she saw me, tears immediately welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered before I could speak. "He promised he was better. The doctor said he'd made progress. Where is he?" My voice came out harder than intended. She pointed upstairs. "In your old room. He's been working on something up there for days." The familiar creak of the stairs under my feet brought back memories I'd tried to bury. At the top, I turned toward my childhood bedroom. The door frame still had the camera mount from years ago, though the camera itself was gone. Inside, Dad knelt on the floor, surrounded by tools and wooden planks. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the man he used to be before the obsession consumed him. His hair had gone completely gray, his face gaunt, but his eyes still held that unsettling intensity. "You came back," he said, setting down his hammer. "I knew you would. I've been preparing." "Preparing for what?" He gestured to the planks, making it safe, all of it. No doors, no deception, just like it should be. He stood, brushing sawdust from his knees. "Your mother told me about your daughter, my granddaughter. She needs protection too." Ice flooded my veins. "You stay away from her. But she's family. Family needs protecting." He moved closer, and I backed toward the doorframe. "I made mistakes before. I see that now, but I understand better. The doctors helped me understand. It's not about removing doors. It's about removing barriers between family." I pulled out my phone, ready to call 911, but he knocked it from my hand. It clattered across the floor. "No outside interference," he said, his voice shifting to that familiar edge of paranoia. "They don't understand. They locked me away, kept me from my purpose. But your mother saw the truth. She knew I needed to come home." Downstairs, I heard Mom's footsteps. She appeared at the bottom of the stairs, wringing her hands. "Maybe we should all talk," she called up, "like a family." Dad's face lit up. "Yes, family meeting. No barriers, no secrets." He turned back to me. "Your daughter should be here too. When does she get out of school?" "Never," I said firmly. "She's never coming here again." His expression darkened. "You can't hide her from me. Hiding creates danger. I learned that in the facility. The doctor said my instincts were right, just misdirected. Family shouldn't hide from family." I edged past him toward the stairs, but he grabbed my arm. His grip was still strong despite his age. "You left for 20 years, he said. 20 years of closed doors between us. Do you know what that did to your mother? To me? We're fixing that now. All of it." I yanked free and rushed downstairs. Mom stood by the front entrance, or what used to be the front entrance. The empty frame let in a cold breeze. "How could you?" I demanded. "After everything he put us through? He's different now," she insisted, though her voice wavered. "The medication helps. He hasn't hurt anyone. He removed the front door. That was my idea," she said quietly. "I thought if I showed him I understood, if I participated, he'd be satisfied with just the one door." A laugh came from upstairs. "Not quite right, not quite sane. One door? Oh my dear, we're just getting started. Every door in this house, then every door in her house. My granddaughter's house too. Everyone safe, everyone visible. No more hiding." I grabbed Mom's shoulders. "You have to see this isn't right. He's not better. He's just learned new words for the same sickness." She pulled away. "Where else can he go? This is his home. I'm his wife, in sickness and in health." "This isn't sickness, Mom. This is danger. Active, real danger." Dad appeared at the top of the stairs carrying his toolbox. "I'll need your address," he called down, "for the safety modifications. Don't worry. I'll start with the exterior doors. You won't even notice I'm there until it's done." "I'm calling the police," I said, reaching for my phone before remembering it was still upstairs. "Go ahead," Dad said, descending slowly. "I'm not under conservatorship anymore. I have rights. A father's right to know where his daughter lives. A grandfather's right to ensure his granddaughter's safety." Mom's phone sat on the coffee table. I lunged for it, but Dad was quicker than I expected. He snatched it away and dropped it into his toolbox. "No outside interference," he repeated. "We handle this as a family." I backed toward the gaping front entrance. "This isn't over." "No," he agreed, smiling that unsettling smile I remembered from childhood. "It's just beginning. You can run, but you can't hide. Not anymore. No more doors between us." I fled to my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I pulled away, I saw him standing in the doorless entrance, toolbox in hand, watching me go. At my daughter's school, I waited in the pickup line, constantly checking my mirrors. When she climbed in, chattering about her day, I forced myself to smile and act normal. But my mind raced with plans. We needed to move, change schools, get a restraining order, something, anything. That night, after dinner, I tucked her into bed and triple-checked all our locks. Our apartment had good security, but would it be enough? I sat by her door, unable to sleep, listening for any sound in the hallway. The next morning brought a new horror. Our apartment building's front door stood propped open. The doorman said someone had jammed the lock mechanism during the night. "Weirdest thing," he said. "They didn't take anything, just broke the lock and left." I knew. Even without seeing him, I knew. At work, I could barely concentrate. Every sound made me jump. When the receptionist said I had a visitor, my blood ran cold. But it was Mom, looking haggard and small. "He's gone too far," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "Last night, after you left, he removed every interior door in the house. Every single one. The bathroom, the bedrooms, even the closets." I begged him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. "Then help me stop him," I urged. "We can file for another conservatorship. Get him back in treatment." She shook her head. "He's too smart now. He knows exactly what to say to seem rational. The doctors taught him the right words. He talks about open family communication and removing barriers to connection. To anyone who doesn't know better, it sounds almost reasonable. Then what do we do?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm scared, not just of what he might do, but of what he's becoming. It's like the treatment made him worse, more focused, more determined." After she left, I called a lawyer, then another. They all said the same thing. Without evidence of immediate danger or violence, there was little they could do. His rights had been restored. The previous conservatorship actually worked in his favor, proof that he'd been successfully treated. That afternoon, I picked up my daughter early from school. We needed to disappear for a while, until I could figure out a plan. But as we walked to the car, I saw him. Dad stood across the street, toolbox at his feet, watching. My daughter noticed my tension. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart. Just get in the car." But she'd already followed my gaze. "Is that Grandpa? Why is he here?" Before I could stop her, she waved. He waved back, that unsettling smile spreading across his face. Then he picked up his toolbox and started walking toward us. I grabbed my daughter's hand and practically dragged her to the car, fumbling with the keys as Dad approached. My daughter protested, confused by my urgency, but I managed to get her buckled in just as he reached the sidewalk. I locked the doors and started the engine, pulling away as he stood there, toolbox in hand, that smile never leaving his face. My daughter peppered me with questions during the drive home. I gave vague answers about Grandpa not being well, about needing to keep our distance for a while. She seemed to accept this, though I could see the confusion in her eyes through the rearview mirror. That evening, I called the school and explained the situation to the principal. She was sympathetic, but explained that without a restraining order, they couldn't prevent a grandparent from visiting during school hours. I hung up feeling more trapped than ever. The next few days passed in a blur of hypervigilance. I changed our routine, taking different routes to school, varying pickup times. I installed new locks on our apartment door, adding a chain and deadbolt. My daughter noticed the changes but didn't complain, sensing my anxiety. On the fourth day, I came home from work to find our apartment building's mailboxes had been tampered with. Mine hung open, the lock broken. The mail was still there, but several envelopes had been opened and resealed. Bills mostly, but also a letter from my daughter's school about an upcoming field trip. My stomach churned as I realized what this meant. He knew our routines now, our schedules. I confronted the building manager, who reviewed the security footage with me. The cameras showed a figure in a maintenance uniform working on the mailboxes around 2 a.m. The uniform obscured his face, but I recognized the way he moved, the slight hunch of his shoulders. The manager said he'd assumed it was routine maintenance and hadn't questioned it. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the hallway sent my heart racing. Around 3 a.m., I heard something at our door, a soft scratching sound, like metal on metal. I crept to the peephole but saw only darkness. Someone had covered it from the outside. I grabbed my phone and the baseball bat I'd started keeping by the bed. The scratching continued for several minutes before stopping abruptly. I waited, muscles tense, but heard nothing more. When morning came, I found fresh scratches around the lock and a small pile of metal shavings on the floor outside. I took photos of everything and went straight to the police station. The officer who took my report seemed sympathetic, but explained that without catching him in the act, there was little they could do. The scratches could have been from anything. The mailbox could have been vandalism. Without concrete proof it was Dad, their hands were tied. Frustrated and exhausted, I decided we needed to stay somewhere else for a while. I booked a hotel room across town, telling my daughter it was a fun adventure. She seemed excited about the pool and room service, unaware of the real reason for our sudden vacation. The hotel gave us 3 days of peace. I started to relax slightly, thinking maybe the distance would help. Maybe he'd give up if he couldn't find us. I should have known better. On the fourth morning, I woke to find a note slipped under our hotel room door. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. In Dad's distinctive handwriting, hiding creates danger. Room 412 has no deadbolt. The connecting door to 414 has a faulty lock. The emergency exit is blocked by a cleaning cart after midnight. I'm only trying to keep you safe. I packed our things immediately. At the front desk, I asked about security footage, but the night manager explained their hallway cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned around 4 a.m. Of course they had. We returned to our apartment because I had nowhere else to go. I couldn't afford to keep staying in hotels, and I couldn't miss more work. I needed to find a permanent solution, but every option seemed impossible without evidence of real danger. That afternoon, Mom called. Her voice sounded strained, exhausted. She told me Dad had been asking about my daughter's school schedule. She'd refused to tell him, and he'd responded by removing her bedroom door while she slept. She'd woken to find him standing over her, explaining that privacy was a privilege that had to be earned through transparency. I begged her again to help me file for another conservatorship, but she insisted it would only make things worse. The doctors had cleared him. The court had released him. Fighting would only escalate his paranoia. I hung up feeling more alone than ever. The next incident happened at my daughter's school. I just dropped her off when my phone rang. The principal's voice was carefully controlled as she explained that a man claiming to be my father had arrived with a toolbox, insisting he needed to inspect the classroom doors for safety violations. He'd been polite but persistent, and when they'd refused him entry, he'd stood outside the fence, taking photos and measurements. I raced back to the school. By the time I arrived, he was gone, but the principal showed me the business card he'd left. Safety First Home Inspections, it read, with a phone number I didn't recognize. The principal assured me they'd increase security and would call the police if he returned, but we both knew that might not be enough. That evening, I sat my daughter down and tried to explain, in terms a 12-year-old could understand, why we needed to be careful around Grandpa. She listened solemnly, then asked if he was sick. I said yes, in a way. She nodded like she understood, but I could see the sadness in her eyes. Another relationship stolen by his obsession. The pattern continued for 2 weeks. He'd appear at the edges of our life, never quite crossing the line into something arrestable. I'd find him sitting in his car outside my office. He'd be at the grocery store when we shopped, always in the next aisle, his cart full of tools. Once, I came home to find him chatting with our elderly neighbor, explaining how dangerous her apartment door was with its old lock. Mom called less frequently now. When she did, her voice sounded hollow. She told me he'd installed cameras throughout the house for safety. She couldn't use the bathroom without being watched. She'd started sleeping in her car some nights, but he always found her, gently explaining how dangerous cars were with their lockable doors. I started documenting everything obsessively. Photos, videos, dates, and times. I filled a notebook with incidents, building a case for anyone who would listen, but without violence, without explicit threats. It all seemed so benign on paper. A concerned grandfather, a safety-conscious father. Who would see the menace in that? The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Our building's doorman, Theo, pulled me aside one evening. He'd noticed the strange man hanging around and had done some digging. Turns out Dad had applied for a job at the building, claiming to be a security expert. He'd made it to the interview stage before Theo recognized him from my descriptions. Theo offered to help however he could. He started keeping a log of every time Dad appeared, noting times and behaviors. He also quietly warned the other building staff, creating an informal network of eyes watching for him. It helped, but it wasn't enough. Dad adapted, as he always did. He started sending packages to our apartment, always harmless items like safety brochures or child-proofing equipment. Each delivery required someone to buzz him into the building. When we stopped accepting them, he had them sent to my daughter's school instead. The school finally issued a formal no trespass order after the third package. It was a small victory, but I knew it would only redirect his attention elsewhere. I was right. He started focusing on Mom again. She called me crying one night, saying he'd removed the doors from her car while she was at the grocery store. She'd come out to find them neatly stacked beside the vehicle, with a note about the dangers of enclosed spaces. The police had come, but what could they charge him with? He'd technically improved her property value by installing expensive safety equipment. I drove over that night, leaving my daughter with a trusted friend. The house looked worse than ever. Every door frame stood empty, but now he'd also removed several windows, replacing them with safety bars. Mom sat in the kitchen, looking defeated. I convinced her to come stay with us for a few days. She packed a small bag while Dad watched from the doorway, explaining how temporary separations could be healthy for processing emotions. His calm demeanor was more unsettling than anger would have been. Having Mom with us changed the dynamic. My daughter was thrilled to have her grandmother around, and for a brief moment, it felt like we'd found a solution. But Dad didn't accept this new arrangement. He started calling the apartment at all hours. When we didn't answer, he'd leave long voicemails about family unity and the dangers of isolation. I changed our number, but somehow he got the new one within days. Then came the letter from our landlord. Several tenants had complained about a man measuring their doors and leaving safety improvement notices. The landlord was sympathetic to our situation, but warned that if the disruptions continued, he might have to take action. I felt the walls closing in. Every solution led to new problems. Every escape route was blocked by his relentless pursuit. Mom grew quieter each day, the guilt of leaving him eating at her despite everything. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday. I'd taken a sick day to handle some apartment hunting, hoping to find a place with better security. Mom stayed home with my daughter, who had a teacher workday. I'd only been gone an hour when Mom called, hysterical. Dad had shown up with a contractor, claiming I'd hired them to remove our apartment door. The contractor, believing the work order was legitimate, had started the job before Mom realized what was happening. I raced home to find chaos. The contractor, a burly man named Theodore, stood between Dad and our apartment, looking confused and angry. He'd realized something was wrong when Mom started crying and my daughter locked herself in the bathroom. Dad remained calm throughout my confrontation with him, insisting he was only trying to help. The contractor apologized profusely, explaining that Dad had shown him fake work orders and had paid in cash. He offered to reinstall the door for free, but the damage was done. This time, when the police came, they took it seriously. The fake work order constituted fraud. The contractor agreed to press charges. Combined with the previous incidents, it was finally enough for a restraining order. But paper doesn't stop obsession. The restraining order just forced him to be more creative. He couldn't come within 500 feet of us, but he found ways around it. He'd stand 501 feet from my daughter's school. He'd have flowers delivered with cards about forgiveness and family unity. Mom struggled with the guilt. Despite everything, she worried about him being alone. I'd find her staring at old photos, crying quietly. She'd mention how he hadn't always been this way, how the obsession had grown slowly over the years until it consumed everything good in him. I started therapy for my daughter and myself. The therapist, Dr. Margaret, helped us process the trauma and develop coping strategies. She also connected us with a support group for families dealing with similar situations. It helped to know we weren't alone. But Dad's behavior escalated in response to the restraining order. He started a blog about the dangers of closed doors and family estrangement. He never mentioned us by name, but the details were unmistakable. He gained a small following of like-minded individuals who reinforced his beliefs. One of his followers lived in our building. I discovered this when I found door safety pamphlets posted throughout the hallways. The building management couldn't prove who was posting them, but I knew. Dad had found a proxy. I hired a lawyer to explore our options. She was honest about the limitations. The restraining order was a start, but without violations, we couldn't do much more. The blog was protected speech. The follower wasn't technically harassing us. We were stuck in a legal gray area. Meanwhile, Mom's health deteriorated. The stress was taking its toll. She developed insomnia, barely eating. I found her one morning standing at our apartment door, just staring at it. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was trying to understand his perspective. Maybe if she understood, she could fix him. I realized then that Mom needed professional help too. I found her a therapist who specialized in trauma from long-term psychological abuse. Slowly, she began to understand that Dad's behavior wasn't her fault, that she couldn't love him back to sanity. The blog grew more concerning. Dad started posting theories about government conspiracies to separate families. He wrote about children being brainwashed against their parents. His followers eagerly agreed, sharing their own stories of unjust restraining orders and false abuse allegations. I reported the blog to every platform I could think of, but nothing violated their terms of service. He was careful with his language, never directly threatening, just spreading his toxic ideology to anyone who would listen. Then one day, Theo called me at work. Dad's follower from our building had been caught trying to remove the lock from the building's front door. When confronted, he'd ranted about safety and transparency, clearly parroting Dad's philosophy. The police were called, and during questioning, he'd admitted to being in regular contact with Dad. This was the violation we needed. Dad had used a third party to circumvent the restraining order. The judge agreed to extend the order and add additional restrictions, including no indirect contact through third parties. But even as I felt a moment of victory, I knew it wasn't over. Dad's obsession had survived 3 years of institutionalization. It had adapted to every obstacle. Legal papers wouldn't cure what was broken in his mind. Mom made the difficult decision to file for divorce. The papers were served at the facility where he'd briefly returned for evaluation after the restraining order violation. She came back from that meeting shaken. He'd been calm, she said. Too calm. He'd simply smiled and said that divorce was just another door that needed removing. We increased our security measures again. I enrolled my daughter in self-defense classes. We practiced emergency drills. It felt excessive, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was building. The something turned out to be a custody petition. Despite having no legal grounds, Dad filed for grandparents' rights, claiming we were alienating him from his granddaughter. The case was dismissed quickly, but it meant more time in court, more stress, more fear. Through it all, my daughter remained remarkably resilient. She threw herself into school and activities, maintaining good grades and friendships. But I could see the effects. She'd become hypervigilant too, always checking locks, always aware of her surroundings. One evening, as I tucked her in, she asked me a question that broke my heart. She wanted to know if Grandpa had always been scary, or if something had made him that way. I told her the truth, that mental illness was complicated, that sometimes people's fears grew until they couldn't see past trust them. She nodded thoughtfully, then asked if it could happen to us too. If we could become so afraid that we hurt the people we loved. I assured her that we were getting help, that we were aware of the danger, but her question haunted me. How much of his paranoia had infected us? How much of our life was now controlled by fear of him? Mom overheard the conversation from the hallway. Later, after my daughter was asleep, she came to me with a determined look I hadn't seen in years. She said she was tired of letting him control our lives from a distance. It was time to take back our power. Together, we started making plans. Not just defensive measures, but proactive steps to reclaim our lives. We joined community groups, built support networks, created lives too full and connected for him to infiltrate. It wasn't easy, and the fear never fully left. But slowly, we began to feel less like victims and more like survivors. The restraining order violations continued sporadically. He'd test the boundaries, always looking for weaknesses. But each time, we were ready. We had documentation, witnesses, support. The legal system, imperfect as it was, slowly began to work in our favor. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Mom met someone new. Theodore was a widower from her support group, someone who understood trauma and recovery. Watching her slowly learn to trust again was beautiful and painful. She deserved happiness after so many years of fear. Dad's reaction to Mom's new relationship was predictable. The blog posts increased, now with veiled references to betrayal and false prophets. But something had shifted. His words held less power over us. We'd built walls he couldn't remove, not physical doors, but boundaries of self-respect and mutual support. Still, I knew this wasn't over. Dad's obsession was too deep, too fundamental to his identity. He'd spent decades building his worldview around the danger of closed doors, the need for absolute transparency. That wouldn't disappear just because we'd found ways to protect ourselves. The next escalation came through legal channels. Dad filed a complaint with Child Protective Services, claiming I was psychologically abusing my daughter by keeping her from her grandfather. The investigation was brief. Our therapist and the school counselor both provided statements about our family's health and my daughter's well-being. But the accusation itself was another form of harassment, another way to force himself into our lives. I started keeping a go bag ready. Important documents, cash, clothes for a few days, just in case. Mom did the same. We'd learned that preparation wasn't paranoia when dealing with someone like Dad. It was survival. My daughter, now 13, surprised me with her maturity through all of this. She'd started volunteering with a local youth group, sharing her story with other kids dealing with difficult family situations. Watching her transform our trauma into something helpful for others filled me with pride and hope. But even as we built our new life, Dad's shadow lingered. He'd found ways to skirt the edges of the restraining order, always present in our peripheral vision, waiting, planning. And I knew, deep in my bones, that eventually he'd make his move. The only question was when and whether we'd be ready. The pattern changed 3 weeks later. Instead of testing boundaries, Dad went silent. No blog posts, no deliveries, no sightings. The absence felt more threatening than his presence ever had. I kept checking the restraining order database, confirming it remained active. Mom called the facility where he'd been evaluated, but they confirmed he hadn't returned. Then Theo mentioned something odd. A new maintenance worker had started at our building, always wearing a cap pulled low and keeping to himself. The man worked night shifts exclusively, focusing on door mechanisms and security systems. My skin prickled at the description. I asked to see the security footage. The building manager hesitated but eventually agreed. We watched grainy video of a figure in coveralls methodically checking every door in the building, making notes on a clipboard. The cap obscured his face, but I recognized the way he tested each handle twice, the particular angle of his shoulders. The manager immediately called the police while I raced home to get my daughter from school early. By the time officers arrived, the maintenance worker had vanished. His employment paperwork led to a fake address. The social security number belonged to someone who died years ago. That night, I found fresh scratches around our apartment lock. Not attempts to break in, but measurements. Precise marks indicating where new hardware could be installed. My daughter noticed them too, her face going pale. She packed her school bag without being asked, understanding we might need to leave quickly. Mom arrived the next morning with Theodore. She'd found similar marks on her new apartment door. Theodore, a former contractor himself, examined them and confirmed they were professional measuring marks for door removal. The precision suggested someone planning a coordinated action. We decided to stay together at Theodore's house for safety. His home had a security system and, ironically, reinforced doors he'd installed after his wife's death. My daughter adapted quickly, treating it like an extended sleepover, but I saw her checking windows and testing locks when she thought no one was watching. The blog went active again after a week of silence. Dad posted about families being held hostage by fear, about children taught to mistrust their protectors. His followers responded with increasing fervor. One mentioned knowing a family fitting that exact description. Another offered to help liberate them. The comment section became a planning ground. I screenshot everything and took it to the police. This time, they took it seriously. The detective assigned to our case, a woman who dealt with stalking situations before, recognized the escalation pattern. She arranged for increased patrols around Theodore's house and my daughter's school, but Dad had anticipated this. The next morning, my daughter's teacher called. A substitute had arrived claiming the regular teacher was sick. The substitute had spent the morning asking students about their home security, framing it as a safety lesson. My daughter had recognized something off and told her teacher during lunch. By the time security arrived, the substitute had vanished. The school went into lockdown procedures. I arrived to find police cars surrounding the building. My daughter was safe but shaken. The principal showed me the substitute's application. The handwriting was different, but the emergency contact number traced back to one of Dad's blog followers. We couldn't stay at Theodore's house anymore. It had become too predictable. Mom suggested her cousin's place 2 hours away, but I worried about dragging more family into this. Instead, I remembered a colleague who owned a cabin an hour outside the city. She'd offered it before, knowing our situation. I called her, and she immediately agreed. The cabin sat isolated, surrounded by woods. One road in, one road out. We could see anyone approaching from a mile away. My daughter missed her friends, but understood this was temporary. Mom and Theodore stayed in the city, maintaining normal routines to avoid showing we'd gone into hiding. For 2 weeks, it worked. My daughter did school schoolwork online. I worked remotely. We established new routines, always alert but trying to maintain normalcy. The isolation felt safe, controlled. We had supplies, communication with the outside world, and distance from Dad's network. The peace shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. I was working on my laptop while my daughter read on the couch. A glint of light through the trees caught my eye, then another. Reflection off glass, binoculars, or a camera lens. I closed my laptop slowly, not wanting to show alarm. My daughter noticed my tension immediately. I pointed to her shoes, then the back door. She understood. We'd practice this. Grab essentials, move to the car, don't look back. We made it halfway before hearing the first power tool. The sound of a drill echoed through the trees, then hammering, coming from the direction of the cabin's front entrance. I pushed my daughter toward the car, keys already in my hand. The car wouldn't start. I turned the key again. Nothing. The hood had been popped recently. Subtle scratches around the latch. My daughter's breathing quickened, but she stayed quiet, trusting me to figure something out. I grabbed our go bag in her hand. The woods offered cover. We'd hiked these trails over the past 2 weeks, learning the terrain. There was a ranger station 3 miles north. We could make it if we moved fast. Behind us, the drilling sounds intensified. Multiple tools now. I recognized the pattern, the systematic approach to door removal I'd witnessed so many times in childhood, but now it felt like a countdown. We moved through the underbrush, avoiding the main trail. My daughter matched my pace without complaint, though I could see fear in her eyes. Branches caught our clothes. The go bag felt heavier with each step, but we kept moving. A crack of breaking wood echoed through the forest. Then voices, not just Dad's. Multiple people calling out about safety and family unity. His followers had come. The blog had become a real-world gathering. I pulled out my phone to call 911, but there was no signal, of course. We'd chosen isolation for safety, but it had become a trap. My daughter tugged my sleeve, pointing to a cluster of rocks ahead, a hiding spot. We crouched behind the largest boulder, catching our breath. The voices grew closer, spread out in a search pattern. They called my name, my daughter's name, promised they just wanted to talk, to explain the danger of closed doors and closed minds. My daughter pressed against me, trembling. I held her tight, mind racing through options. The ranger station was still 2 miles away. The voices were getting closer. Then I remembered the emergency whistle in the go bag. 3 sharp blasts meant distress. Maybe someone would hear. I pulled it out, but my daughter grabbed my hand. She pointed to a small trail I hadn't noticed before, barely visible through the brush. Her exploration over the past weeks had found paths I'd missed. I nodded. She led the way. The trail was narrow, winding. Behind us, the voices grew frustrated. Someone mentioned checking the car again. Another suggested the main trail to the ranger station. They were thinking like adults, predictable routes. My daughter thought like a child, finding passages they'd overlook. We emerged near a creek. The water wasn't deep, but it was cold and fast-moving. My daughter didn't hesitate. She waded in, knowing water would mask our scent and tracks. I followed, the shock of cold clearing my mind. We followed the creek for half a mile before climbing out on the opposite bank. The voices had faded, but I knew they hadn't given up. Dad's obsession had infected others now. The danger had multiplied. A small service road appeared through the trees. Not on any map I'd seen, but my daughter had found it during her wanderings. She'd always been observant, a trait that now might save us. We followed it, staying in the tree line. The road led to an old fire tower, abandoned but sturdy. We climbed quickly, my daughter first, me watching below. At the top, cell signal returned. Weak but enough. I called 911, gave our location, explained the immediate danger. The dispatcher kept me on the line while units responded. 20 minutes, she said. Stay hidden, stay quiet. Below, we could see movement through the trees. Figures converging on the tower. They'd found us. Dad emerged from the tree line first. Even from this height, I could see his toolbox. Behind him, 6 others. Men and women, all carrying tools. All believers in his twisted philosophy. They surrounded the tower's base. Dad called up, his voice carrying clearly. He talked about reconciliation, about removing barriers, about how hiding in a tower was just another form of closed door. His followers nodded, setting up equipment, ladders, rope. They planned to come up. My daughter found the tower's emergency lock mechanism, old but functional. We secured the trapdoor just as the first ladder hit the tower's frame. The structure shook with their climbing, multiple people ascending from different angles. I held my daughter as the tower swayed. She buried her face in my shoulder but didn't cry. Below, sirens finally wailed in the distance. The climbing stopped. Voices argued below. Some wanted to continue. Others recognized the approaching danger. Police cars appeared on the service road, then more from the forest trails. Officers surrounded the tower, weapons drawn, commands to drop tools and step away. Most followers complied immediately, the spell broken by real authority. But Dad stood firm, toolbox clutched to his chest. The standoff lasted 10 minutes. Officers tried negotiation, but Dad only talked about doors and danger, about protecting family from barriers. He took a step toward the tower, and officers moved to restrain him. The toolbox scattered across the ground. Hammers, screwdrivers, and something else. Photographs of my daughter, of our apartment, of every door we'd passed through in recent weeks. They arrested all 7. Dad didn't resist, just kept talking about safety and transparency as they led him away. His followers looked confused, lost without their leader's certainty. The officer who'd been on the phone with me climbed up to check on us. My daughter finally let herself cry. The aftermath moved quickly. The followers faced various charges: conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, stalking. Dad faced the most serious charges, including violation of the restraining order and orchestrating harassment through third parties. The photographs proved premeditation. This time, the system worked differently. The judge reviewed the blog, the elaborate planning, the recruitment of others. Psychiatric evaluation was mandatory. The doctors diagnosed what we'd always known but couldn't name: delusional disorder, persecutory type with obsessive features. Medication wasn't optional this time. Mom testified about decades of escalating behavior. I presented our documentation. Even some former followers testified, explaining how Dad's writing had drawn them in, made them believe they were saving families. The judge ordered long-term psychiatric commitment with no possibility of release without court approval. I watched them lead Dad away. He looked smaller somehow, older, still muttering about doors and safety, but the words had lost their power. The heavy security door closed behind him. No tool tools would open it from inside. My daughter started regular therapy with Dr. Margaret. The trauma ran deep, but she was resilient. Mom continued her own healing journey with Theodore's patient support. They married quietly 6 months later, a small ceremony with reinforced boundaries and genuine joy. We moved to a new apartment. Better security, yes, but also better light. My daughter chose her room, decorated it herself. We installed doors that locked from inside. She tested them repeatedly at first, then gradually forgot to check. Progress measured in small freedoms. The blog disappeared, removed for violating terms of service after the arrest coverage. His followers scattered, some seeking help, others finding new obsessions. The building where we'd lived upgraded their security systems. Theo still worked there, always watching for signs of trouble. I returned to work full-time. My daughter returned to school. Normal life crept back in small doses. Movie nights without checking locks, sleepovers without fear, conversations that didn't revolve around safety plans. Time helped, though healing wasn't linear. One evening, my daughter asked if I thought Grandpa would ever get better. I told her honestly that some illnesses were too deep, too much a part of someone to fully cure. But treatment could help. Boundaries could protect. We could choose how much space to give the illness in our lives. She nodded, then asked if we could visit him someday, when she was older, when she felt ready. I said maybe, surprised by my own answer. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement that he was sick, not evil. That the grandfather who'd terrorized us was also the father who'd once pushed my swing at the park before the fear consumed him. Mom found old photos during her move. Dad in his 20s, installing our first door. Proud, normal, safe. The obsession had crept in slowly, she said. So slowly she hadn't noticed until doors started disappearing. By then, it was too late to pull him back. We created new traditions. Sunday dinners at Mom and Theodore's. Holiday trips to places Dad had never been. My daughter made friends who didn't know our history. She told them eventually. Matter of fact about her grandfather in a psychiatric facility. They accepted it as just another family story. The fear never fully left. Certain sounds still made me freeze. My daughter still preferred bedrooms with windows facing the street. Mom still slept with lights on, but we learned to live with it, like an old injury that ached before rain. Present, but manageable. 2 years passed. Dad remained committed, his condition stable but unchanged. The doctor said he'd built his entire identity around the door obsession. Without it, he had nothing. Treatment kept him calm, but couldn't give him a new foundation. He spent his days writing letters about safety that no one mailed. My daughter grew taller, more confident. She joined the debate team, arguing passionately about mental health resources. Her experience had shaped her, but hadn't defined her. She talked about becoming a lawyer, helping families navigate systems that had failed us for so long. I sometimes drove past the facility where Dad lived, never stopping, just acknowledging its existence. The building looked like any other medical center. No signs of the broken minds inside, wrestling with realities that didn't match the world. I wondered if he watched the doors, counting their locks, planning removals he'd never execute. Mom and Theodore built a life free from fear. Their home had doors that closed, locks that worked, privacy respected. She learned to sleep through the night. He learned her triggers, helping her feel safe without enabling fear. Love after trauma looked different, but felt real. My daughter asked fewer questions as time passed. The story became history, something that happened before. She focused on present and future, leaving past to therapy sessions and occasional nightmares. I watched her grow beyond our trauma, proud and slightly envious of her ability to move forward. We kept the go bag for a while. Then one day, I unpacked it, put documents in a filing cabinet, clothes back in drawers. The emergency whistle went in a junk drawer. Preparation had become habit, but the immediate danger had passed. We could breathe without looking over shoulders. Life filled the spaces fear had occupied. Work projects, school plays, family dinners. Normal problems replaced extraordinary ones. Bills and homework and teenage moods. Beautiful, ordinary chaos that didn't involve tools or missing doors or midnight escapes. We'd survived and now could live. The restraining order expired eventually. No renewal needed with Dad committed. Just paper anyway, I realized. Real protection came from distance, boundaries, and the strength we'd found. Legal documents meant less than the walls we'd built inside ourselves. Walls with doors we controlled. My daughter graduated middle school with honors. Mom and Theodore sat beside me, watching her walk across the stage. She'd chosen to use her experience for her graduation speech, talking about overcoming family challenges. No details, just themes of resilience and hope. The audience applauded, not knowing the weight behind her words. That night, she hugged me tight and said thank you. For protecting her, for showing her strength looked like asking for help, for teaching her that love sometimes meant letting go. I held her close, remembering the terrified child in the tower, marveling at the young woman she'd become despite everything. We'd found our ending. Not perfect, not without scars, but real, safe, ours.